A very, very regular visitor to your wonderful county, usually spending my time just a few miles down the road here at St Mary's Stadium. So I will of course be back in this great county and in that great city on Sunday for a particular football match, which I think we can all agree will be a pretty straightforward, rudimentary home win, right? But anyway, if I can't be at St Mary's, it's great to be here, here in the stadium of the second greatest football club in Hampshire. So thank you very much, Eastleigh, for inviting me. In fact, when the publicity material came out, I did contact one of the organisers, and I said, just a little bit of a question for you. Why have you got Professor Matt Goodwin's face just above the Union Jack? Dr. Starkey's face just above the St George's Cross, and my face just above the Hampshire flag. And quick as a flash, I got a reply saying, well, Professor Goodwin is the leading broadcaster trying to save Britain. That's why he's got the Union Jack. Dr. Starkey is the leading historian about England. That's why he's got the St George's Cross. And you, Mark, are a fan of Southampton Football Club, and that's why you've got the Hampshire flag. So I guess I'll settle for that. But jokes aside, whatever your football allegiance, or even if you have none, I hope that we can find some unity in this room around a number of things. And I detect, I've just picked up in this room now, but also having spent a couple of days at the Reform UK conference in Birmingham, that I think most reformers agree Britain is broken, but it's not unsalvageable. It can be turned around. Britain's not beyond repair. It can be mended. It can be fixed. And I just want to share a few thoughts with you about the breakages and what I think the repair might look like. And I'm actually going to start with the economy, usually considered the biggest thing in politics. But as I'll explain later, I think the economy might be a rather downstream issue. I think there are other things influencing the economy. But I want to spell out in some simple numbers how bleak it is, and if you're serious about fixing Britain, how serious the medicine is going to be. Virtually every politician of any stripe talks about the need for economic growth. We've got to grow the economy. But under parties on both stripes, Labour and Conservatives, the recent numbers have been bleak. If you look at economic growth from 1997 to the time of the financial crash of 2008, the banking crisis, in rough and ready terms, the UK was growing at 3% a year. Each year, we were getting 3% richer as a country. Since that time, we've been getting richer at 1% a year, just 1% a year. Now, you might say 3%, 1%, potato, tomato, no big difference between those numbers. But if you are saying that, you didn't ever listen to Albert Einstein, who said that the eighth wonder of the world is compound mathematics. And there are those who understand it, and then there are those who pay for it. And we're in danger of being those who pay for it. If you're growing at 3% a year, it only takes 23 years to double the size of your economy. Roughly each generation, you'll be twice as rich every 23 years. If you're growing at 1% a year, it takes 70 years, 70 years to double the size of your economy. This is why growth matters, and we haven't had it. So if we can get back to the 3% level of growth, every 23 years, we would all, on average, be twice as rich. If we get stuck in our present cycle, it will take 70 years. And talking to you as somebody in my late 40s, but my very late 40s, well, all right, I'm 53, so my very, very late 40s. I think I've probably got 23 years left, maybe a bit more, but I haven't got 70. So I want this problem cured. Second worry on economics, our present approach is unsustainable. It can't be kept going like this. The last time a government of any stripe balanced the budget, that is to say, only spent what they were bringing in tax revenue, was 2001. 25 years of governments living beyond the means of taxpayers. Back in 2001, our debt was 28% of national income. That's to say, if in any given year we had all put aside 28p in the pound, we could have cleared our national debt in 1 year, theoretically. Our national debt is now 100% of national income, some quarter of a century later. If you look at our liabilities, things that we have promised to pay, but are not on the balance sheet, pension liabilities, public sector pensions which are gold-plated, the likelihood that an ageing population will need more healthcare and more social care, our total debt is probably something more like £7 trillion. 7 trillion sounds like a big number, and it is, but to put that in understandable individual terms, that's £100,000 of debt for every man, woman and child in the United Kingdom. That is what government overspending has done. And we have had a big and inefficient state. A good way of measuring how big the state is in terms of the economy is what proportion of all spending in Britain is down to the government. How much is government spending and how much is private sector spending? Well, that number in the UK now of government spending is about 44%. That's to say, of every pound spent in the UK, 44p is spent by the government and only 56p in the private sector, getting towards 50-50. And let me put that in some sort of comparative context. If you look at the fastest growing economies in the world now, or those economies which were the fastest growing in the past, you'll typically find, rough and ready numbers, that if you want to grow quickly, you need a government sector, a public sector, that accounts for about 20% of GDP. Singapore, for example, 19% of GDP is government spending, 81% is private sector spending. So somewhere around 20%, if you want fast growth, seems to be the way you need to go. If you look at most economic historians' analyses of the former Soviet Union, and opinions vary, and it's difficult to measure the exact economy of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had a state sector that amounted to about, most people agree, 70%, 70% of national income. 70% was run by the state, only 30% was the private sector, and most of that was the black market economy. So Singapore, the fastest growing economy, is about 20%. The USSR, as was, about 70%. Britain, 44%. Pretty much bang in the middle of Soviet state communism on the one hand and the fastest growing economies on the other. I suggest to you we might want to tilt a bit more in the Singapore direction and a bit away from the USSR direction. But whatever your views on whether you want the government to do more economically or less, I think economists would agree we cannot afford to pay for the government we presently have. Here's a number to cudgel with. Over my entire lifetime, okay, I accept, now into my 50s, no longer my late 40s, no government of any stripe has been able to squeeze more than 38% of tax out of the economy. And everything's been tried. We've had top rates of tax of 98%, top rates of tax of 40%. We've had VAT as low as 5%, as high as 20%. We've mucked around with inheritance tax, local government tax. Virtually anything you can think of has been tried, and no government has been able to squeeze out of the public sector, of the private sector, more than 38%, more than 38p in the pound. Some haven't wanted to be that ravenous. Margaret Thatcher's government, it was more around 31 or 32%. So the maximum amount, in rough and ready terms, that you can spend is 38p in the pound if you want your government to be sustainable, and we are spending 44. It's got to be 38 or lower in round terms. And that's going to mean all political parties have got to face this reality. I'm not making an ideological point, I'm making a mathematical point that we need to bring that back into balance. The economy is screwed because the state is too high, tax is too high, everything is regulated, and the government doesn't spend money well. That means there needs to be a dramatic reduction in state spending. Broken Britain Part 1. Secondly, what you might call the social fabric of our country. Way, way harder to measure. You can't put this into numbers or spreadsheets as easily. But I think it's fair to say more and more British citizens feel like they are becoming strangers in their own land, are losing faith in the behaviour of their own institutions, think that Britain is being treated as a landmass, not a country. Immigration is probably at the top, the most high-profile one of those concerns, but it's not the only one. And if we're looking at immigration, let me give you my take. And I am actually going to use a Kelly Badenoch analogy here. I think she's right when she says our country is a home, not a hotel. I think we've got to start treating the United Kingdom as a club. It's something you can apply to join, but don't have a right to join. And you know what most clubs have? I'm a member of a very nice club on Pall Mall, the Reform Club in London. It has a membership fee. If I don't pay the membership fee, of about £2,000 a year, quite a high membership fee, I am kicked out. It then has a whole load of club rules about what you can wear, how you need to address each other, what penalties will be imposed upon you if you swear or are unpleasant to a member of staff, let alone commit a criminal offence. Break any of those rules and you're kicked out. Why don't we apply the same sort of concept to people who want to come and join the United Kingdom? Let me tell you what the membership fee would be. If you take all government expenditure in Britain and divide it by the 70 million people who are presently on these islands, that membership fee comes out at about £18,000 per person per year. That's the membership fee. It's a rough average, okay? Elderly people tend to cost a bit more on healthcare, younger people cost a bit more on education, but that's the membership fee. If you can't pay that, why are we inviting you into the club? And the club also then needs to have, in my view, codes of conduct. Unfortunately, our judiciary appears to have completely overlooked this. I don't know how many of you saw the case today, in which when we actually allow a 7/7 Al-Qaeda mastermind out of prison having served his sentence, the judge wishes him all the best for the future. All the best, quote, unquote. But it's not just immigration, it's the police force, it's the insanity of gender ideology, it's climate change and carbon net zero. I have a really, really good argument to take on the Greens with, which really riles them up. If you are at all worried about the state of the climate that we are leaving to our children and grandchildren, I'm not sure I am at all worried, but if you are worried about it, the legacy that we are leaving to our children and our grandchildren, if you're worried about that at all, you should be apoplectic about the state of the public finances that we are leaving to our children and our grandchildren. So what is to be done? Where's the bad news? How do we tackle it? How do we get it? Because If you know how we got into this mess, you might find some ways out of it. And I know our next speaker will touch on these with considerably greater knowledge and eloquence than I can. But what we've seen in Britain, and Matt Goodman said this as well, particularly since the late 1990s, is inch by inch, drip by drip, power has been taken away from democratically elected politicians and the people, and it has been transferred to a bureaucracy that is completely out of touch with British public opinion, and a judiciary which has become increasingly politicised. Matt referred to the Quang. For those of you who aren't aware, that stands for Quasi-Autonomous Non-Governmental Organisation. Think the Environment Agency, the Arts Council, Ofcom, Ofgem, Off God knows what else. There's a whole plethora of the offs. I can tell them where to get off for most of them. These are the people who on a day-to-day basis are actually running Britain on a day-to-day basis. You might think it's a stupid idea, I certainly do, to build a fast rail line between London and Birmingham for £100 billion. But Natural England then say you must have a bat tunnel in order to preserve the bats on a particular leg of the journey. You'll remember the scandal from a few weeks ago that some outfit called the Sentencing Guidance Council decided that we were going to change the sentences that you would get upon being found guilty of an offence, and you would potentially get a lower sentence if you were an ethnic minority or from a minority religious group, and therefore, the corollary, a higher sentence if you were Christian or white. The Sentencing Guidance Council. The Justice Secretary at the time, whatever you may think of her, seemed to be blindsided by this. This quangler, this unelected, almost self-appointed group who had decided these should be the rules. But she did write a very stiff letter to them. That seems to be how we have castrated our politicians. You might not like this government, you might not like the last one, but what we have to do is to put our democratically elected politicians back in charge, because you, the people in this room, can kick them out. And that is not a power that you have over these committees and quangos that have grown up. The judiciary, similarly, I think are no longer applying the law, they are making up policy. If you wish to affect immigration policy in the United Kingdom, there is now, ludicrously, a good case that you would be better off becoming a High Court judge than becoming the immigration minister of the United Kingdom. Because the application of the ECHR, the Human Rights Act, and everything else, means that whatever the politicians say, the judges ultimately will decide. And if you're not willing to unravel that legal nightmare, I'm afraid we're not going to move far forward. So Britain is broken. I think the reason that your party is doing so sensationally well is that you've got the diagnosis basically right. You pretty much analysed what illness the patient has pretty damn well. Certainly better than any other political party in Britain. And consequently, a large number of voters are saying, yeah, reform, they're my guys. They've got the diagnosis right. Your big challenge now isn't just to win the next election, which would be a miraculous task in itself, but that would only be the beginning. You can't just get the diagnosis right, you're going to have to get the surgery right when you win. And to go back to my football analogy, in football, if any team wins the league or wins the FA Cup, that's mission accomplished. Winning the next election is not mission accomplished. Winning the next election just gives you a chance to put these things right. So for all of the campaigning that you're engaged in, all of the fundraising you need to do, all of the knocking on doors, all of the leafleting, all of trying to win that election, I encourage you to think of this. If you get that chance, are you sure you know how to put things right? Because I think it needs a smaller state, a more democratic state, the elimination of every quango in Britain, and the judiciary being put back in its box. And if that's your platform, not only do I think you've got a fair chance of winning the next election, I think you've got a fair chance of saving Britain too. Thanks for your time.